chocolate covered candy hearts.
A turntable spins in a quiet room, the kind of late-night silence where one song can rearrange your whole evening. These 10 records didn't just climb a chart in the 1980s. They broke sales machinery that the industry hadn't built replacements for yet. Diamond certifications, #1 in 28 countries. Songs you've sung at a wedding without ever learning the story behind them. Subscribe now, because the song sitting at #1 on this list was recorded in the middle of the night under impossible pressure by two people who could barely stand to be in the same room, and it became the most successful duet in chart history anyway. The countdown begins now. Number 10, All Night Long. All Night, Lionel Richie, 1983. A hotel suite somewhere, late 1982. And Lionel Richie is sitting with a half-finished song built on a rhythm he can't quite place yet, something closer to a Caribbean street parade than anything the Commodores had ever recorded. He'd already spent a decade as a hitmaker inside a group. Now he was alone with a blank page, and the terrifying question every successful band member eventually has to ask himself, who am I without the other 5 guys standing next to me on stage? The song almost didn't survive its own chorus. Richie has said he spent weeks circling the track, certain the verses worked but unable to find a hook strong enough to carry them. He kept testing the same flat line, asking listeners to sing along, and it went nowhere. The breakthrough arrived almost by accident, at a Jamaican friend's dinner table. Leaving that house close to 2 in the morning, Richie told his host he had to head back to the studio to work all night long, and heard the hook in his own sentence before he'd finished saying it. What he did with that phrase afterward says as much about his confidence as the writing itself. Needing something that sounded African for the song's breakdown section, Richie discovered there was no single African language to borrow from, just thousands of distinct dialects, so he simply invented the words himself, phonetic syllables built for rhythm rather than meaning. He's described it since as a private joke that the entire world ended up singing along to without ever knowing the punchline. Even his label wasn't convinced. According to Richie, Motown executives reportedly questioned his sanity when he told them he was releasing a calypso-flavored single, and he answered that this was simply the rhythm the whole world already danced to on vacation, whether American radio had caught up to it yet or not. All Night Long answered the bigger identity question almost instantly. Released in August 1983 as the lead single from Can't Slow Down, it climbed to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 for 4 weeks that November, while simultaneously ruling the R&B chart for 7 weeks straight. It hit #1 across Canada, Australia, Finland, Brazil, South Africa, Belgium, and the Netherlands. If you were anywhere near a radio in the fall of 1983, this song found you whether you were looking for it or not. But the song was never really the whole story. Can't Slow Down, the album it opened, became a certified diamond seller in the United States, 10 times platinum within roughly 2 years of release. It won the Grammy for Album of the Year in 1985, beating out a field that included Bruce Springsteen, Prince, Tina Turner, and Cyndi Lauper, 4 artists who, on any other year, would have been the most obvious winners in the room. Lionel beat all of them with a record built on horns, chant vocals, and a feeling of pure, unguarded celebration that nothing else on the chart that year was attempting. 84 Summer Olympics, broadcasting that same Caribbean soul party to a global audience that had no context for the Commodores at all. A young, then unknown Cuba Gooding Jr. was reportedly among the dancers on that stage, years before anyone knew his name either. By 1984, All Night Long didn't need an introduction. It had already become something closer to a universal language.
Come on and sing along, we going to party.
The 10 times platinum certification that gets repeated in nearly every retrospective about this song actually belongs to the album Can't Slow Down as a whole, not the single itself. An easy detail to blur because the two are so tightly fused in cultural memory. The The single's true standalone achievement, 4 weeks at #1 on the pop chart and 7 weeks atop the R&B chart, is staggering enough on its own. But even that gets quietly overshadowed by the bigger, blurrier diamond number constantly attached to its name. Sometimes a song's legend grows so large it borrows credit from its own album, and nobody notices the difference. Number 9, Sweet Love, Anita Baker, 1986. A jazz club somewhere in Detroit, sometime in the early 80s, maybe 40 people in the room on a slow Tuesday night, and a singer with a voice like dark honey is performing material the industry simply doesn't know what to do with yet. Anita Baker had already been through one group, Chapter 8, and one largely ignored solo album before anyone in the business understood what her sound actually was. It didn't fit the synthesizer-driven moment. It sounded like something older, warmer, and far more patient than the radio in 1983 wanted to be. Then Rapture happened. Released in 1986, the album's lead single, Sweet Love, hit radio that May and simply refused to leave. It peaked at number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 2 on the R&B chart, and number 3 on Adult Contemporary, a song that didn't just cross between formats but seemed to live comfortably inside every one of them simultaneously. Rapture itself went on to sell roughly 8 million copies worldwide, 5 million of those in the United States alone, and Sweet Love was the single reason an entire generation of record store visits happened that summer. The Grammys noticed in 1987, awarding the song Best R&B Song, while Baker herself took home Best R&B Vocal Performance Female. It was the industry's way of finally admitting what the audience had already decided on its own. There's a particular kind of singing that doesn't perform at a crowd. It speaks to one person, direct eye contact, no theatrics, just truth. And that's exactly the register Baker found and never abandoned. What made the song so disarming wasn't its complexity, it was its intimacy in a decade obsessed with bigness, with drum machines and stadium-sized productions. Baker simply sang like she was standing 2 feet away from you in a quiet room, and somehow that quieter approach outsold most of the louder records around it. There's a useful contrast hiding inside this entry too. The same year Anita Baker was finally being rewarded for refusing to chase the era's loudest production trends, Marvin Gaye and Prince were both scoring massive hits by leaning directly into drum machines and synthesizers, Sexual Healing and When Doves Cry among them. Baker's success proves the decade wasn't actually defined by one single sound. It had room for the maximalist and the minimalist to top the same charts in the same stretch of years, which says something about how wide the format genuinely was. Even when retrospectives tend to flatten the 1980s into one synthesizer-driven monolith. Before Rapture, the industry genuinely didn't know how to market Anita Baker's voice, a tone too jazz-inflected for pure R&B radio and too soulful for the smooth jazz format, and that confusion nearly buried a singer who would go on to help define an entire subgenre, Quiet Storm, that radio programmers eventually built entire formats around. Her first solo album barely registered commercially, not because the talent wasn't there, but because nobody in the marketing apparatus had a category ready for a voice that refused to chase the decade's dominant sound.
Baby, he don't talk sweet. He ain't got much to say.
Number 8. Let's Hear It for the Boy, Deniece Williams, 1984. A recording booth, sometime in early 1984, and a former background singer for Stevie Wonder is being handed a song that almost didn't exist. The Footloose production team had originally built an entirely different track for the scene where Chris Penn's character learns to dance, called Somebody's Eyes, something slower and moodier, written in a minor key by the same songwriting team. Director Herbert Ross, who'd come onto the project after Michael Cimino was fired from it, didn't think the song matched the scene's energy at all. So the songwriters, Dean Pitchford and Tom Snow, went back to the drawing board and this time built something from the opposite direction entirely, starting not from a melody, but from a single uplifting phrase that became the song's title before a note of music existed around it. Pitchford had unusual leverage going into the pitch. He'd written the Footloose screenplay himself and composed lyrics for every song in the film, and with Kenny Loggins' title track already locked in and climbing the charts ahead of the movie's February 1984 release, Pitchford felt confident enough to approach Deniece Williams directly, along with her established producer George Duke, to record the replacement song under serious time pressure. Williams had already had hits by the time Pitchford and Duke brought her the song, 2 R&B number ones already to her name, but nothing prepared her, or anyone else, for what was about to happen. Released in April 1984, it climbed to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 by May 26th, holding that position for 2 weeks, while simultaneously topping the R&B chart and the dance chart. It peaked at number 2 in the UK, held off the top spot only by Wham! The Footloose soundtrack itself became one of the defining sales phenomena of the decade, with 6 different songs from it cracking the Billboard Top 100, an unusually deep run for a movie soundtrack that typically produces one massive hit and then fades. Williams' track sat right alongside the title song's success, matching it nearly beat for beat, which almost never happens with a soundtrack's second single. It's also worth noting how unusual the song's chart behavior really was. It hit number 1 on the R&B chart despite belonging to a film with an almost entirely white cast set in small-town Oklahoma, evidence that the song's appeal had completely separated itself from the movie it was written for. What gave the song its staying power wasn't really its connection to the film at all. It's a song about loving someone exactly as they are, imperfections included, sung with a joy so uncomplicated it cut directly through a decade otherwise obsessed with synthesized perfection and polished production. Decades later, it remains one of those songs that instantly returns a listener to a specific gymnasium, a specific dance floor, a specific feeling of pure, uncomplicated celebration. The song that became one of the defining singles of the entire decade existed only because an earlier, completely different version of the scene's music had been rejected at the last minute, forcing 2 songwriters to build something from nothing under serious time pressure. The detail that often gets exaggerated in retellings, that Williams herself was flown overnight to redo an unsatisfactory vocal take, doesn't hold up against the songwriter's own documented account of events. A reminder that even well-meaning music history gets quietly rewritten the more times a story gets repeated.
I can't fool myself, I don't want nobody else.
Number 7. Never Too Much. Luther Vandross, 1981. A recording session somewhere in New York, sometime in the late 70s, and the man singing backup vocals on records by David Bowie, Diana Ross, Stevie Wonder, Chaka Khan, and Donna Summer is exactly the kind of voice an entire industry depends on without ever learning his name. Luther Vandross had spent years as the secret engine behind other people's hits. The man you heard on 1,000 records and never once saw credited on the label. He'd also sung jingles, commercial work, anything that paid, while quietly building the kind of vocal control that takes most singers an entire career to develop, and most listeners never consciously notice. By 1981, he was finally ready to step in front of the microphone under his own name. Never Too Much, the title track from his debut solo album, dropped that October and hit number 1 on the R&B chart for 2 weeks, climbing into the top 35 on the Hot 100. The numbers on the Hot 100 alone don't tell the real story. The album itself went double platinum, 2 million copies sold for a debut release, from an artist most of the listening public hadn't even heard of yet. Vandross wrote it, produced it, arranged every vocal layer himself. This was entirely his vision from the first note, and it announced a particular kind of R&B sophistication that hadn't quite existed in this exact form before. Smooth and meticulously crafted, but somehow still warm enough to feel like an intimate conversation rather than a studio exercise. It became, almost immediately, the song people reached for when they wanted to signal good taste, a romantic mood, an entire emotional register that didn't need to shout to be felt. Of his career, Vandross would go on to sell roughly 25 million records worldwide, but the debut alone, the introduction, the first impression, moved 2 million copies entirely on the strength of a voice that had spent years standing just out of the spotlight, waiting for a turn that finally came. It's worth sitting with how rare that trajectory actually is. Most session singers stay session singers. The skills that make someone reliable in the background, the ability to disappear into harmony, to make someone else's vision sound effortless, don't automatically translate into the kind of singular presence a debut solo album requires. Vandross had to relearn, in real time, how to be the center of a song rather than its support structure. And he did it so convincingly that within a single album cycle, nobody remembered him as the guy in the background anymore. Vandross spent the better part of a decade as one of the most valuable, least visible voices in the entire music industry, the literal sound of other artists' biggest records, before he was given the chance to release a single under his own name. The same instincts that made him an indispensable background singer, restraint, precision, a willingness to serve the song rather than dominate it, very nearly kept him permanently in the shadows of artists with far less natural talent than his own. Number 6. Beat It, Michael Jackson, 1983. A recording studio in Los Angeles, October 1982, and Michael Jackson is working on a song built around a single, uncomfortable idea, the choice to walk away from violence instead of meeting it head-on. It's a strange theme for a dance record, and an even stranger one for the biggest pop star on the planet to be writing about. But 1983, America was living through rising gang violence and an increasingly hard street culture. And here was Jackson, at the absolute peak of his fame, saying you don't have to fight, you can just walk away and live to see another day. Beat It became the third top 10 single from Thriller, an album that would eventually produce 7 total top 10 hits on the Billboard Hot 100, a feat no album had ever achieved before. It hit number 1 on the pop chart for 3 weeks that April and May, briefly topped the R&B chart as well, and crossed into rock radio entirely on the strength of an unforgettable guitar solo from Eddie Van Halen, who agreed to play on the track essentially as a favor, without asking for payment. Van Halen reportedly worked the solo out and recorded it in a single afternoon session, slipping away before Jackson himself had even arrived at the studio that day, which means 2 of the song's most important contributors barely crossed paths during the making of one of the most famous guitar moments in pop history. That crossover wasn't a small thing. Beat It wasn't just an R&B song wearing a rock costume for a single guitar break. It functioned as proof that the wall between black music and white rock radio, a wall the industry had spent decades quietly reinforcing, could simply be dismantled by a song good enough to make the separation feel absurd. Every artist who came after Jackson inherited a slightly wider lane because of what this single accomplished. Jackson a Grammy for Best Rock Vocal Performance, Male, an almost unthinkable category for an R&B artist to be recognized in only a few years earlier. Thriller's 7 top 10 singles remain one of the most extraordinary commercial runs in chart history, a record that has only been matched twice since by Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA and Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation 1814. Succeeded specifically because it proved black artists didn't need to choose between R&B authenticity and rock radio access, but that proof came at a cost almost nobody discusses: the fact that it took one of the most famous human beings who has ever lived, at the absolute peak of unprecedented global fame, to finally force that particular door open. The barrier wasn't dismantled because the industry changed its mind. It was dismantled because Michael Jackson became simply too big to keep shut out, which says less about progress than it does about how high the bar had been deliberately set for everyone who came before him. Number 5. Sexual Healing. Marvin Gaye, 1982. An apartment in Ostend, Belgium, sometime in early 1982, and the Prince of Motown is living in quiet exile from his own country, hiding from a tax debt to the United States government that had grown into the millions, uncertain whether the music industry that built him still had any use for what he could offer. He hadn't had a major hit in years. Disco had collapsed. Synthesizers were reshaping the entire sound of popular music. And Marvin Gaye, the man behind What's Going On and Let's Get It On, genuinely didn't know if anyone still cared whether he made another record at all. The road to Ostend itself had been a kind of rescue. A Belgian promoter and longtime friend named Freddie Coussert convinced Gaye to relocate there after a European tour, arranging an apartment and covering his expenses while Gaye worked to climb out from under both his addiction and his debts. Slowly, the change of scenery worked. A successful run of English tour dates that summer restored some of Gaye's confidence, and when he returned to the Belgian coast, 2 musicians from his touring band, keyboardist Odell Brown and guitarist Gordon Banks, stayed behind with him to keep working on new material. The 3 of them built a reggae-tinged instrumental track using a brand new piece of gear, a Roland TR-808 drum machine that had barely appeared on any hit record yet, and which Gaye reportedly liked, specifically because it let him build a song without needing to lean on outside musicians or studio time he couldn't afford. The song's title has its own tangled history. Writer David Ritz, who had come to Ostend to help Gaye on his upcoming biography, was present during a conversation about Amsterdam's red light district, and is widely credited with suggesting that Gaye sounded like a man in need of some sexual healing. Ritz wrote a lyric around that idea, one Gaye reportedly said sounded exactly like something he himself would say, and the words fit so naturally into Gaye's own catalog of philosophical, conflicted songwriting that the line between collaborator and ghostwriter blurred completely. Ritz wasn't credited as a songwriter on the original release, only thanked in the liner notes, a dispute that fractured his friendship with Gaye and ended in a lawsuit Ritz eventually won after Gaye's death, adding his name permanently alongside Gaye and Brown on the credits. Released in October 1982 as his first single since leaving Motown for Columbia Records, the song crossed over to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 while ruling the R&B chart for 10 consecutive weeks, the longest run at the top that chart had seen in years. The parent album, Midnight Love, eventually sold over 6 million copies worldwide, going triple platinum in the United States alone, becoming the most commercially successful album of Gaye's entire career. What made the record so disarming wasn't ambition. Gaye wasn't chasing Prince or Michael Jackson's sound, despite reportedly being aware of both as the new threats to his audience. He was simply being entirely himself, that same smooth, searching voice that had always made a listener feel like he was singing directly to them and no one else in the room. The Grammys agreed, awarding the song Best Male R&B Vocal Performance and Best R&B Instrumental Performance in 1983, with a nomination for Record of the Year as well. Marvin Gaye had proven, decisively, that the industry had been wrong to count him out. He'd found his way back from exile, from financial ruin, from genuine professional irrelevance, into the biggest commercial success of his career. Less than 18 months after Sexual Healing became his triumphant return, Marvin Gaye was dead, shot by his own father during a violent confrontation at his parents' home in April 1984, one day before what would have been his 45th birthday. He never lived to see how completely the song would outlast him, how it would become a staple of weddings and slow dances and late-night moments of human comfort for the next 4 decades. The man who sang about healing through intimacy spent the final 2 years of his life unable to find peace inside his own family, in the one relationship his music could never repair. Number 4. I Just Called to Say I Love You. Stevie Wonder, 1984. A recording studio in Germany, sometime in early 1984. And Stevie Wonder is racing against a soundtrack deadline for a forgettable romantic comedy he hadn't been particularly eager to score in the first place. He'd already won 20 Grammys by this point in his career, already released songs in the key of life, already written Superstition and Living for the City and Isn't She Lovely. He didn't need the Woman in Red to prove anything. He took the assignment anyway, partly because Dionne Warwick, the film's music coordinator, had personally suggested him for it. What came out of those sessions became, against nearly every prediction, the biggest single of his entire career. Released in August 1984, I Just Called to Say I Love You hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 for 3 weeks that October, simultaneously topping the R&B chart and the adult contemporary chart for the same 3 weeks, and reaching #1 in 28 countries worldwide. In the UK, it became Wonder's only solo #1 hit ever, staying there for 6 full weeks and becoming Motown's biggest selling single in that country's history. The song's defining quality was its almost defiant simplicity. No elaborate arrangement, no complicated structure, just a synthesizer, a melody, and 4 words repeated with total sincerity. In a decade where R&B production was growing more layered and technically ambitious by the year, Wonder stripped everything away and just said the plainest possible truth out loud. That simplicity is precisely why it worked as well as it did, connecting with an audience far beyond anyone who would normally seek out an R&B record. The song won the Academy Award for Best Original Song in 1985, along with a Golden Globe in the same category, beating out nominees that included Phil Collins' Against All Odds, Footloose, Let's Hear It for the Boy, and Ghostbusters, in what remains the only year in Oscar history where every single nominee for Best Original Song had also been a #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100. It's worth pausing on that detail specifically because 2 other songs on this very list, Footloose itself and Let's Hear It for the Boy, were standing right next to Wonder's record on that same Oscar ballot, only to lose to a song that didn't even share their genre. Despite winning the Oscar and the Golden Globe, the song never actually won a Grammy, receiving 3 nominations: Song of the Year, Best Male Pop Vocal Performance, and Best Pop Instrumental Performance, and losing all 3. The story that frequently circulates, crediting Wonder with an Oscar, a Grammy, and a Golden Globe for the very same song, simply isn't accurate. A small but persistent piece of music mythology that has been repeated so often, it's nearly replaced the actual record. Even one of the most decorated artists in American music history has had parts of his own legacy quietly inflated by retellings that nobody bothered to check. Number 3. When Doves Cry. Prince, 1984. A studio in Los Angeles, March 1st, 1984. And Prince is alone, as he so often was, recording every instrument and every vocal on a track himself, building the lead single for the Purple Rain soundtrack with nobody else in the room to argue with. The film's director, Albert Magnoli, had asked for one more piece of music to score a specific montage, and Prince reportedly wrote and tracked the entire song in a single overnight session at Sunset Sound. At some point during the process, he laid down a complete bass track for the song, listened back to it, and made a decision that should have sounded insane to anyone in the music business. The song was stronger without it.
This is what it sounds like when doves cry.
There is no bass line on When Doves Cry, none. Prince told Bass Player magazine years later that the track was the very last song on Purple Rain to get mixed, and that it simply wasn't landing, sounding too much like every other record built on the same drums, bass, keyboards formula. So he told his engineer that if he could have the mix exactly his way, it would sound like the version with the bass pulled completely out. According to Prince, it was actually singer Jill Jones, present in the room, who told him to simply have it his way, and he muted the bass track on the spot. In a genre built almost entirely on rhythm and groove, Prince removed the single instrument most associated with both, and somehow made the record sound more urgent, not less, leaning instead on a Lin LM1 drum machine and a haunting synthesizer line played on a Yamaha DX7's Koto patch.
Maybe I'm just like my father.
Released in May 1984 as the lead single from Purple Rain, it hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 for 5 weeks, simultaneously topping the R&B chart and the dance chart, eventually becoming the best-selling single of the entire year.
This is what it sounds like when it does.
The song was, underneath its strange, stripped-down sound, intensely personal. In the film, the lyric soundtrack a montage in which Prince's character has lost his love interest to a rival, while flashes of his own troubled, violent childhood home cut in alongside it. A fear of becoming exactly like the parents who raised him. Maybe I'm just like my father. Too bold. Maybe you're just like my mother. She's never satisfied. That kind of unguarded vulnerability, paired with a baseless arrangement nobody else would have attempted, made the record feel genuinely alien compared to everything surrounding it on the radio. The music video, which Prince directed himself, opened with white doves emerging from double doors to reveal him in a bathtub, imagery so sensual that network executives reportedly considered it too explicit for television. MTV aired it constantly anyway. It was nominated for Best Choreography at the 1985 MTV Video Music Awards, and decades later, after Prince's death in 2016, the song re-entered the Billboard Hot 100 entirely on its own, climbing back into the top 10 32 years after its original release. When Doves Cry became the best-selling single of 1984 specifically because it broke nearly every rule the genre depended on: no bass, deeply confessional lyrics, an arrangement built almost entirely on tension and absence rather than groove, and the industry's response wasn't to question the formula. It was to quietly absorb the lesson that audiences would follow genuine artistic risk further than anyone expected, a lesson that would shape pop production for the rest of the decade, even as Prince himself continued chasing stranger, less commercial instincts that the industry was never quite as comfortable rewarding again. Number 2. Billie Jean, Michael Jackson, 1983. A television studio, March 25, 1983, and Michael Jackson is about to perform a song that didn't even belong on the broadcast, technically. Motown 25 was supposed to be a celebration of Motown's catalog exclusively, and Jackson's new single wasn't a Motown song at all. Producers worried about the politics of letting him debut something new when older Motown legends, including Marvin Gaye, weren't being given the same opportunity. They let him do it anyway, and the rehearsal alone convinced everyone in the room that something extraordinary was about to happen. Billie Jean had been written about persistent groupies who'd falsely claimed Jackson was the father of their children, a story rooted in genuine paranoia rather than any real event, and that anxious, haunted quality became the emotional engine of the entire record. Before it ever reached the studio, though, the song nearly lost the three things that made it instantly recognizable. Producer Quincy Jones reportedly disliked the title outright, worried listeners would confuse Billie Jean with tennis legend Billie Jean King, and pushed for the alternate title, Not My Lover. He also wanted to trim the song's unprecedented 29-second instrumental intro, famously telling Jackson it ran so long a listener could shave during it, and by some accounts wasn't initially sold on the bass line either. Jackson held firm on all three. His explanation for keeping the intro intact was short and, according to Jones, essentially unanswerable. That's the part that makes me want to dance. Jones backed down, and the bass line in question carries an unmistakable resemblance to Hall & Oates's "Can't Go For That, No Can Do," a debt Jackson reportedly acknowledged directly to Daryl Hall himself. Released in January 1983 as the second single from Thriller, it hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in March and stayed there for 7 consecutive weeks, becoming his fastest rising #1 since ABC, with the Jackson 5 back in 1970. Billboard ranked it the second biggest song of the entire year. The song is certified diamond by the RIAA, 10 million copies sold in the United States alone, making it Jackson's best-selling solo single of all time. But its impact reached well beyond sales figures. MTV had barely played black artists before this single, the network insisting it operated as a rock channel, that R&B simply didn't fit. The Billie Jean video, directed by Steve Barron, with Jackson lighting up sidewalk tiles as he walked, became the first video by a black artist to enter heavy rotation on the network, a single chart position that quietly reshaped the entire television landscape around it. Then came Motown 25 itself. Airing 2 months after the taping to roughly 47 million viewers, Jackson moonwalked backward across the stage in white socks during the song's bridge, a single 2-second movement that the entire room, and eventually the entire country, would spend the next decade trying to understand. Fred Astaire personally called Jackson the following day to offer his congratulations, the closest thing dance had to a passing of the torch. Jackson, by his own later admission, walked off that stage in tears, convinced his spin and toe stand hadn't lasted as long as he'd wanted, an anxious postscript almost nobody watching at home could have guessed at. Quincy Jones wanted to cut the song's now iconic bass-driven intro because he felt it ran too long before the vocals arrived, and he wasn't alone in underestimating the track at first. He has separately described his initial reaction to the demo as genuine disbelief. Jackson would build a single around something so unconventional. Jackson fought him on the intro and won, insisting those opening seconds needed room to breathe before a single word was sung. Those same seconds are now among the most instantly recognizable openings in the history of recorded music, meaning one of the greatest producers of his generation nearly erased the exact detail that made the song unmistakable. And it was the artist, not the professional behind the boards, who turned out to have the sharper instinct. #1, Endless Love, Diana Ross and Lionel Richie, 1981, a recording studio in Reno, Nevada, 3:30 in the morning. May 8, 1981, and two of the biggest names in American music are racing against a deadline neither of them fully agreed to. Diana Ross had just finished a concert across the state line in Lake Tahoe. Lionel Richie was still, technically, a member of the Commodores, writing what he believed would simply be an instrumental theme for a film called Endless Love, until director Franco Zeffirelli and producer John Peters changed their minds at the last possible moment and asked for lyrics and a duet, and specifically Diana Ross. Richie was terrified. He'd never written a duet in his life, and Ross wasn't just any singer. She'd led the Supremes, one of the most successful acts Motown had ever produced, while Richie was still the guy from the Commodores trying to prove he belonged in a room with her at all. Motown brokered the deal. Ross agreed. Time was booked in a 16-track Reno studio for that narrow overnight window, and the clock was brutal from the start. Richie has said the song needed to be finished and turned around within roughly 12 hours, with the added pressure that the film's production was effectively waiting on him to deliver it. Ross drove straight from her Lake Tahoe performance to make the session, arriving exhausted, and in less than 2 hours that night, after a full concert and almost no rehearsal, they had their vocals on tape.
Your every breath that I take.
Endless Love dropped that June, and by August 15th, sat at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, holding that position for 9 consecutive weeks, the longest run any duet has ever managed on that chart, and at the time the longest reign of any single in Motown's history, surpassing even I Heard It Through the Grapevine. It topped the R&B chart for 7 weeks, ruled adult contemporary, reached #7 in the UK, and dominated charts across Australia, Canada, Holland, and Sweden. It sold more than 3 million physical copies in 1981 alone, people walking into stores, paying cash, carrying vinyl home specifically because of this one song. And yet, according to Lionel Richie himself, The experience of making it felt, in the moment, like nothing short of a disaster. Richie has said in multiple interviews that he believed the recording session was chaotic, rushed, and barely functional in the moment it happened, while Diana Ross has separately described their working relationship as genuinely difficult, citing her own need for punctuality against Richie's far looser process. They disagreed over who should sing which part. The song wasn't even supposed to be a duet until days before they recorded it. And somehow, out of every one of those tensions, two artists who didn't fully trust each other's process built the most successful duet in the history of the Billboard Hot 100, a record that has now stood, unbroken, for more than 4 decades. Sometimes the songs that sound the most effortless are the ones that very nearly didn't survive the room they were made. 10 records, 10 different kinds of impossible. A man hiding from his own government, building a hit on a drum machine he could barely afford to be without. A producer who almost cut the most iconic 4 seconds in pop music twice over on 2 different songs. 2 artists who could barely agree on a microphone placement, building the greatest duet ever recorded anyway, in under 2 hours, with the clock already against them. Every one of these songs is a letter mailed forward from a decade that didn't know yet which of its risks would become legend. Tell us in the comments which record surprised you most, and subscribe for the chapter we haven't told yet, because we are not done uncovering what this industry buried. The music never lies, even when the industry does.